The question on everyone's mind is the war with Iran over? And if it is, was it a success? We're going to dive deep into this question. Join me for a fascinating discussion with Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, who is a senior fellow at FDD and a former IDF spokesman. This is the question on everyone's mind, and we are going to unpack it today in True East. Jonathan, good to have you back.
Shalom, Doron. A pleasure to be here.
Just a few hours ago, President Trump said that great progress has been made towards a complete and final agreement with Iran aimed at ending this conflict. So I want to ask you a question I think that's on everybody's mind. Is it over?
Short answer would be no, I don't think so, because I think there is a profound misunderstanding by our American allies of the psyche of what Shiite resistance means, what the Iranian regime is about, and what is needed in order to really bring them to their knees and whether that is at all possible. And I think the Americans have done a lot of things right. I think the Trump administration has been very focused on telling the Iranians, telling the region, you are not going to have nuclear weapons, and the president has been very consistent about that. The U.S. has taken very effective economic and military measures against the Iranian regime, and they are indeed hurting. But there still is a very long way, in my perspective, to go from the suffering and the pressure that the Americans are applying on Iran as we speak through the effective economic blockade to actually bringing this to a close and for effectively getting the Iranians to, as President Trump has said, say uncle, or actually say we surrender and commit to the terms that President Trump has said that they're going to have to do, which means no enrichment in Iran and to effectively forever give up their nuclear weapons program. Now, in order to bring the Iranian regime to such a situation, I think that much more pain, leverage, and squeezing is needed because the Iranian regime has a, I would say, higher bar for higher tolerance for suffering, mostly because they don't really care what happens to the country, to the civilians, and what the long-term consequences are. And also because losing and winning in Shiite culture is different to what you and I and Americans and Israelis and Westerners would perceive winning and losing to be.
How so?
For them, in their historical context, as Shiites against other parts of Islam, but also against other religions, a loss, a clear military loss, can actually be perceived as a temporary setback or even a victory. And if you look at Shiite history, especially Shiite Iranian history, you'll see that there's a lot of events in history where actually the Shiites lost on the battlefield, but they claim it as a victory and they spun tales of victory, which then became etched in their psyche and in their general ethos as a shaping event of victory, even though if you analyze it through a military and, reasonable, logical lens, it was actually a defeat. And I think that's important knowledge. Lots of, praise for American action so far. I think we are blessed to be in the time that we're in, to see an American president do what many of his predecessors, all of his predecessors, failed to do, which is to have the leadership, the ability to sustain pressure, and to do what needs to get done in order to prevent a future threat to the U.S., and to the region, and of course to Israel. But what we're seeing is, I think, still a bit of a misunderstanding of really what the other side is about, what makes them tick, and what needs to be done in order to actually get them to sign the deal that's needed.
A lot of people are going to say that this makes no sense, that President Trump, even just a few days ago, said that there's no deal if there's enriched uranium in Iran. And as we know, there's still enriched uranium in Iran, and part of the nuclear program, it still exists.
Yep.
So they're going to say that the reason he's doing this is because of the midterm elections, or because somebody sent me today, he doesn't have the heart to go through with this. Is there another strategy here? I mean, what's his game plan right now beyond just retreat?
I think what President Trump is doing is very effectively buying time domestically speaking, market-wise, oil price-wise, and international pressure-wise. He is effectively buying time, allowing himself more time to have the economic sanctions and the military pressure weigh more heavily on the Iranian regime. I think that's what it really is about. Communicating that there's progress, communicating that the Iranians are indeed in direct negotiations, they are softening and ready to make a deal. But then the Iranians outwardly on Twitter, they're very tough, lots of macho, lots of tough talk, lots of bravado, but you see that their actions don't really match the statements, and that they're far below the threshold of what they're saying that they're capable of doing. They've done far less. So what I think the president is doing is applying pressure across the board, using the military and economic sanctions, and the freedom operation that is now ongoing. That's pressure. Not allowing the Iranian ports to be accessed. That's pressure. And the fact that the Iranians know that if they escalate the situation, they are in for one hell of a beating. If they escalate and if they attack American vessels, if they do something more meaningful than just attacking the UAE, as they've demonstrated that they're capable of doing. But they're in quite a sensitive situation here. And what I think the president is doing, wants to buy time in order for the measures that are being taken against the regime to have more effect and for them to actually come and make a deal. And yes, we've been here before. You and I, we spoke about the JCPOA many years ago. We both, I think, share the understanding of how flawed of a deal that was. Why was it flawed? For many, many reasons. But the primary one was that it gave the Iranian regime a legal pathway to a bomb. It gave them access to money, unfrozen sanctions. It gave them access to technology. It gave them the time that they would need in order to manufacture or buy tens of thousands of ballistic missiles. They would have had time to match between missiles and nuclear warheads. And it would have given them the ability to eventually legally break out and have enriched material at a high enough level, which they then could weaponize and turn into a nuclear bomb at the end of the agreement. And nobody would have been able to claim that the Iranians were not within their legal rights to do so. That was the JCPOA. That is why it was so flawed. That is why so many Israelis and Americans said, this isn't a good deal. And so did the Saudis and many other countries.
The UAE.
And the UAE.
In fact, brought Trump, I think when Netanyahu went to Congress and stood before the world and said this, I think that cemented his relationship with Trump to the modern day. I think Trump saw that and said, look, there's one person in the entire world that's standing in front of all of America in a regime that is not overly friendly to Israel and is standing up for this. And after it didn't happen, I think Trump it lit a fire under him.
Yeah, I think we have to, look at President Trump and give him credit for being very consistent on the Iranian issue. President Trump has been very clear, and he has said this consistently throughout. His first tenure as president, in between, and as he campaigned and as he took power. He's been super clear. And it's only, regretful that the Iranian regime, the IRGC, they've made the mistake of thinking that this president is like the others who say lip service that, we cannot, Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. And it's been said by so many presidents before, yet they didn't do anything. But President Trump has been very consistent here and very clear. And I think this situation that we're in could have been prevented. The Iranians could have prevented a lot of suffering for themselves, and many lives could have been saved had they only listened and understood that, well, no, they are not going to get away with the same bullying tactics and the same negotiations. By the way, they're very good at using negotiations. They have very skilled negotiators. They have a team of, I would say, world-class negotiators that are skilled, experienced, savvy, know what they're doing, and they use diplomacy, delays to the fullest extent, and they've done so masterfully. Now they meet a president who responds differently to economic and political and media pressure. He pushes back, and he's able to sustain that pressure, and he's consistent, which they haven't met before. So the Iranian system is in a bit of a disarray. Disarray because they're confronting an enemy or an adversary that behaves differently than what they've been gotten used to, and because they've been exposed. Their military weakness has been exposed. Their internal political weakness has been exposed. Their corruption and their mismanagement of Iranian resources, of their water, electricity, oil, infrastructure, all of that is exposed and bare for everybody to see. But perhaps most humiliating is how deeply they've been hit by the US and Israel.
That leads me to a question. We talk about the negotiations. You have Abbas Araghchi, who's leading the negotiations, and there's a big question when President Trump calls Iran, who's answering the phone?
Right.
Who is it? Some say it's Abbas Araghchi. Some say it's Mujtaba, the son of Khamenei. Who is, after we've dealt them this blow, what is happening on the ground in Iran right now, let's say with the leadership, before we get to the people of Iran, and I don't know if we have any idea what the people are. Who's answering the phone? Who are the power players there?
Yeah, so I think we should be, careful in our assessments because it is difficult to really know what's going on in Iran. I'd say that there's quite significant fog of war. There's uncertainty as to who really is in charge, who's on first and who's on second. That is unclear. But I would say that most of what we're seeing in terms of Iranian decision-making and Iranian actions lends us or makes us believe that those who are in charge are the hardliner faction, and that it's basically the IRGC, a few generals that are in command. They use their separate chain of command, which is outside of everything else. They're the ones who make decisions of who to fire missiles at and what to do. International shipping vessels, the UAE, oil facilities in the UAE against American vessels. They're the ones who are making those decisions. A rare glimpse into what appears to be the disarray in the Iranian system was when Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, tweeted his dismay with the fact that Iran had hit UAE. Where he said, well, it wasn't us and this wasn't really what we desired to do. And it's not the first time that the second, or the man who is allegedly second in control, there's the head of state, which is the so-called supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, the son of, who we don't know exactly how effective he is, what kind of control he actually has over proceedings. There's reports, which I cannot corroborate, that he is, totally secluded, that he is really controlled by the IRGC, and they're just using the offices, the powers of his office in order to go ahead with the policy that they believe is right. That's a pretty dominant assessment in most of the circles that I've listened to. But then you have Pezeshkian, who arguably represents a different type of Iranian policy.
Perhaps more moderate. Again, moderation is a funny word.
Yeah, it's a funny word, and we should always be, I think, very careful when we use the word any iteration of moderate when it comes to an official authority in Iran. They are part of the regime which has been butchering Iranians, oppressing the Iranian people, funding terror, and creating instability all over the Middle East. So, when Pezeshkian speaks about moderation, I take that with many grains of salt. But bottom line here, we're looking at a system that appears to be in certain disarray at the higher strategic level of what to do and where to take things from here. However, when I analyze what they're doing at the military level, I can see a functioning military system. I see someone giving orders, probably in Tehran, and orders being executed on the battlefield in Hormuz or in other places. I see orders being given, missiles fired, drones fired. In order for that to happen, you have to have a functioning intel collection system, you have to have communications, you have to have logistics, and you have to have forces that are capable of executing the orders. That is still in place. So when the Americans and some Israeli politicians speak about, complete Iranian disarray, that isn't really accurate. There's a functioning military system that exists, degraded, with smaller and chawed off teeth than what they had before, but it still works.
Yeah, it's like an image when you step on an anthill and all of a sudden you crush it at the core, and then you see the ants splay out in all those directions. It looks like Iran was set up. I mean, as long as they were centralized, Israel and the U.S. within minutes took out that central core, and now they've decentralized. It's much more difficult to stop them. So my question is, if we have IRGC commanders that are giving orders, generals along Hormuz, all they need are weapons they probably have already stockpiled to threaten one of the world's largest shipping lanes in the entire world.
Yeah.
So if there is a return to fighting, what is going to be the strategy, do you think, of the United States to address that, which is a very difficult, decentralized, somewhat autonomous threat that can essentially freeze the world in the headlights?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that's what our viewers are mostly interested in hearing. What's next? And if we go back to fighting, if the Iranians choose to try to, by military escalation, wrestle themselves free of the pressure that the Americans are applying effectively against Iran, there is the option that they will try to use kinetics. They identified what I think they believe is the weakest link, the UAE, and they attacked their oil resources in Fujairah and a few other locations. The UAE have been protecting themselves pretty well, but nevertheless, there's damage. If the Iranians try to escalate beyond that, then there will probably be an American response to that.
So if you look at the map, I asked Control to pull up a map here. Can you explain kind of where along Hormuz, like how would this work if you've got U.S. forces in
Yeah, I
Hormuz?
mean, we have U.S. forces even outside of this map, but what we see is the western part really on the right side of the map here, where it says UAE just above that. That's the tip of the Hormuz Strait. And then, of course, we have really the hub of most of the oil and gas infrastructure in the region. Of course, Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and not in color here are Iranian oil facilities in the Kharj Island, which is in the northern part of the Persian Gulf or the Arab Gulf. So what we see here is existing oil and gas infrastructure that probably would be targeted, very likely the Iranians would target. Because when we look at the Iranian toolbox here, what they have at their disposal, what they had before the war started and what they currently have. So they've attacked oil and gas infrastructure all over the Middle East. They've attacked civilian infrastructure in Israel. They have tried to strike oil and gas and electric in Israel. They've struck military infrastructure.
They've struck the pipeline, right?
They have,
the East-West pipeline. I don't know if it's functional. It's somewhat functional.
Yeah, it is. As far as I know, it's currently functional. They struck it, I think it was 3.5, almost 4 weeks ago. As far as I know, it's been fixed, at least to a sufficient level to allow flow. And all of what we see here and additional infrastructure that is related to oil and gas, refineries, storage depots, everything else that is part of the very sensitive and highly or very expensive infrastructure that exists will probably be an Iranian target. And I think we should assume that they have good enough intel. This isn't a surprise mission. They've had lots of time to prepare for this. And I'm sure that the Iranians have most of the things already in their target bank. So that's I think it's very likely that the Iranians will go for this. Question will be, will they be able to tell the Houthis to actually exercise the second doomsday tool that they have, which will be the last one that they have available, and that is to try to close maritime traffic in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait that connects between Yemen and the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Eritrea, and that area. That'll be interesting to see, because up until now, for reasons still unknown to me and to most people, I would say, they have either decided not to or not been able to. And that is a big question, whether or not they'll be able to do that in the future. If they do, that'll be a significant threat to international shipping, and that will add pressure on oil exports. I'd say that in any case, the amount of maritime traffic has been reduced significantly in the Bab el-Mandeb area and in the Suez Canal as a consequence of it. Most of it is going around Africa out of safety. But nevertheless, that would be important. So that's another thing, hitting oil and gas. Second, trying to close the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, and probably trying to inflict damage on smaller, weaker Gulf states. I'd anticipate that they would try to strike Israel as well, even though that hasn't been successful. Thankfully for the Iranians, they have very little to show for their efforts, the massive amount of drones and missiles that they've been firing. And in response to that, the US and Israel can make the decision to, for the first time, take the gloves off, because both countries have been fighting with their gloves on as a matter of policy and decision.
What would that look like, Jonathan?
So
I mean, 16,000 at least, right? Munitions have been dropped on Iran. It doesn't look to many people,
yeah,
certainly outside world, but what would it look like?
so I mean, what's been done so far is proper military targets that are single-use military. So no dual-purpose targets, or very few dual-purpose targets have been struck. Almost all of Iran's energy, transport, communications, water, and road infrastructure hasn't been touched. That's by policy, by decision, because the end game here is, of course, to allow a good future for the people of Iran, and destroying their infrastructure would make it more difficult for the Iranian people to eventually climb out, reclaim their country, and have a prosperous future. That is probably the main reason why the US and Israel didn't do that in the beginning. That will probably change now, and I think there's a lot of infrastructure that serves the IRGC, that supports the logistics of the IRGC, that is part of the command and control, logistics, supply, or any other effort that facilitates Iran's war-making efforts. They will be targeted. Another, and you touched upon this before, the IRGC leadership. I think won't be surprising anybody, and if they're watching the IRGC leadership, I don't think that they'll, just take notice because we speak about it, but there will be significant efforts by all parties involved, CIA, Mossad, Israeli Air Force, American Air Force, to target them and to take away a third generation of Iranian leadership in less than 2 months or 3 months' time, which will be important. And that's ongoing. I think that there must be tremendously intense intel work being done now as we speak. The US and Israel scrambling to get a good enough situational awareness and to be able to hopefully repeat with a certain level of success the opening salvo of the war, when Khamenei and 40 or so other senior Iranian leaders were taken out. So leaders, infrastructure, and of course the Strait of Hormuz is, I would say, that's separate, because that cannot be confined only to an aerial campaign. That is a force that has to be joint in the sense of air, land, sea, and of course electronic warfare, spectrum, and of course massive intelligence. That's a military operation that CENTCOM has the ability to do, that they have been readying themselves to do for quite some time. They have the intel, they know what needs to be done, but it's a mission that needs presidential orders, and for someone to say, go do it, open the Strait of Hormuz and make sure that the Iranians do not have the ability to hinder international traffic again. What it means is that there needs to be a willingness for America to actually face consequences of possible casualties, which of course we all hope will be low and insignificant. But when you look at it from a military perspective, opening the Strait of Hormuz by kinetic force is a mission that will likely be challenging. According to the assessments that I understand, it will take a few weeks to get done. But just like any other mission in this region, America has the firepower, the intel, the logistics to do it. It's a matter of choosing whether or not to do it.
This week, even again, amidst this week, before President Trump said there's been great progress towards a deal, one of the previous Truth Social comments was it will take 3 weeks approximately if there's a return to fighting. At the same time, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, made comments saying that there's, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not quoting exactly, something to the effect of the U.S. will not need to commit ground forces in order to take over Hormuz. So again, it could be more smoke and mirrors and more, trying to create muddy waters in order to catch the fish. What do you make of these? Because it seems like you said, without there being a kinetic answer, you're not going to be able to flush out what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, the Strait of Hormuz, as far as I understand it, it's a complex military challenge. The Iranians have embedded themselves well. They have prepared infrastructure. within the mountainous terrain, the shore area close to the Strait of Hormuz. They have effective firing positions there, missile launchers that they have dug and hidden in cave systems that have an opening many miles away that are hard to detect. And from my military perspective, this is a mission that will need boots on the ground. It will need either special forces or rangers or marines or any force that is capable of either dropping from the air or landing, beaching from the sea in order to take certain areas that are important. I don't think it's a mission that can be done only from the air or from the sea. If the US really wants to have a very high level of certainty that the Iranians won't have any ability to hit any vessels in the region, which they probably will try to do because, for the straits to really be open, it has to be safe enough, not for a military vessel to pass with electronic warfare systems and jammers, but for an unarmed, slow-moving, giant freight cargo vessel to do so, and the insurers have to feel safe enough to do it. That's what eventually will be the benchmark. So if you really want it open and you're going to do it kinetically, that'll take some doing. But again, the US has the ability to do so, and I think that they won't be doing it alone. If they decide to do it, I think there will be Israeli involvement in terms of electronic warfare, airstrikes, collecting intel, and maybe other assets.
So Pete Hegseth, again, the Secretary of War, was asked earlier this week about the U.S. and Israel if our objectives are being aligned. And I don't know if that was a person that was asking because they knew that the U.S. was going to be making such a public statement that was coming down the line. But Pete Hegseth said that the Israel and the U.S. may have slightly different objectives, but that there's only one hand on the wheel. So I think there's two interesting components of this. One is that we may have slightly different objectives, and the other one is clearly, at least from their perspective, there's only one person driving. I don't know if Israel exactly agrees with that long term, maybe short term. But what types of, are you feeling that there's different objectives here, and is Israel getting a little bit jittery?
I've been saying so from the get-go. I think we have skin in the game. The Americans have, strategic posture, force projection issues, and their perspective is, power competition with China and their ability to exercise dominance in the region, oil markets, access to resources, etc. For Israel, our perspective is this is life and death. This is the ability of Israel to continue to exist, to defend itself, to allow its citizens to live normal and safe lives. So of course, there's a different perspective here. And of course, what will be sufficient for the US in terms of end results may not be what Israel aspires. I think our aspirations as a country that has been at the receiving end of Iranian aggression for so long, whether it's direct Iranian aggression, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Houthis, Iranian proxies in Iraq or in Syria, or all of the above combined, our perspective is much more, well, let's get rid of this regime because it has done so much wrong. It is such a destabilizing factor in the region. It is something that has a clear focus and an official goal, which is to destroy the state of Israel. So yes, I think there is a gap here between what Israel will eventually seek to do, and that is to overthrow the regime and to rid ourselves, and the region of the greatest destabilizing and menacing factor, the Iranian regime, whereas the US probably can live with an existing regime, crippled, subdued, without nuclear capabilities, and that has been forced to come to the table and sign, okay, we're not going to enrich, and we're handing up the enriched material. Which will be probably enough for the Americans to say, okay, mission accomplished. And they'd be able to do so with quite a lot of justice behind it. I don't think there's any doubt in Israel or in the region who calls the shots. I think it's pretty clear that President Trump calls the shots. There are many things that have happened so far that are not to Israel's liking, and I think Israel would have wanted things to be differently. But there is a pecking order in the business here, and the U.S. is in the lead. The U.S. is the global superpower, and all of the people who claim that, it's the tail that's wagging the dog, complete misunderstanding of the balance of power, the balance of power between the U.S. and Israel. And I can give many examples of how, Israel is being forced to hold back and to limit its military operations and pressure against its enemies because the U.S. has other priorities. Israel was stopped short of finishing off Hamas. Israel has been told not to continue striking Hezbollah in Lebanon, even though our enemy is on the ropes. They're down, they're not out yet, but when your enemy is down is the time to actually continue with the pressure. Israel is being told not to. So I think it's pretty clear where that situation stands.
Let's drive into Lebanon. Since you talked about with Hezbollah and Israel kind of being stopped on the border. Israel right now is holding very key high positions, as I understand correctly, in Lebanon, overlooking Hezbollah. But Hezbollah is adapting. I mean, there's a drone warfare that's going on intensively. Unfortunately, Israel is losing soldiers. Every soldier is precious, not at vast quantities, thank God, but we are taking hits. Where do we hold right now? Can you give us a picture of where we are in Lebanon today?
Yeah, so what the IDF has done is, and it, for me, it rings familiar. I remember fighting in southern Lebanon as a young soldier, being positioned in the old Crusaders fortress of the Beaufort Castle, just across the Litani River, close to the Nabatea area and Arnoun. So what we can see is kind of it's a pretty similar line, referred to colloquially as the yellow line, which is a forward deployment of Israeli troops a few kilometers away from the border. This area is a little bit bigger than what Israel had from 1982 to 2000. A little bit bigger in a certain few areas. It's across the Litani River, and some parts that weren't included in the past are included in today. But the important thing is, I think, what Israeli troops are doing there. This isn't what Israel used to do, in the late 90s, whereby Israeli troops are positioned in stationary fortresses and basically waiting for attacks and just trying to act as a buffer between Israeli communities and where Hezbollah was. What Israel is doing now is actually changing the lay of the land, the landscape, and making it very difficult for Hezbollah to use anything in that area against Israeli civilians for the foreseeable future. How is that being done? By dismantling the infrastructure that we saw with our own eyes that Hezbollah was using against Israel. And I'm referring to houses that for the untrained eye, the eye that doesn't have intel behind it, looks like a civilian home. There are entire villages, Shiite villages in southern Lebanon, Ait Ashaib in the western sector, El Khayam in the eastern sector, and many others, all of the area around Metula, El Adeise, and Kleya, and many other places that looked like civilian villages, but they were Hezbollah strongholds, where almost every house was used by Hezbollah either to collect intel or to stage operations or to fire at Israel or to have fighters underground in a tunnel or any of the above combined. So what Israel is doing now, and that's an important part going forward at the tactical level, is simply clearing those areas. And whenever our viewers will have the opportunity to come to Israel and see the northern border, I encourage them to do so, because what's happening now is that landscape is changing. It's changing for the better from a security perspective of Israelis, and now there's going to be this more permanent buffer zone, even when Israeli forces withdraw from it, whereby it'll be difficult for Hezbollah to use Lebanese civilian infrastructure in order to attack Israel. That's important, but that is only at the tactical level. That isn't a strategic achievement, because Hezbollah possesses weapons that are, of course, capable of reaching more than a few kilometers of the size of a buffer zone. And what we're seeing is a kind of a very elastic ceasefire. On paper, officially today, there's a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel. In reality, The last time that sirens sounded in northern Israel was exactly 2 hours ago, and there have been relentless alarms and incoming attacks, drones, rockets, missiles from Hezbollah, and the IDF, as I said, has been conducting operations as well. The bigger pieces aren't happening. We're not striking in Lebanon. We're not striking in the Bekaa Valley, and the most sensitive targets of Hezbollah are currently off limits as per American guidance. And what we have in Beirut and other locations, and what we have is a situation where there's goodwill, there are good intentions on the Lebanese and on the Israeli side, but reality is that nobody is disarming Hezbollah. The Lebanese government isn't doing it. They're talking about it, but we don't see them taking action. And Israel is being prevented from exercising more military capabilities. Now, to be very honest and clear, I, from a military perspective, don't think that it's reasonable to believe that the IDF has the ability to disarm Hezbollah, to dismantle Hezbollah, to defeat it militarily at this current situation. That would be a task that would take years, probably, and would entail lots of resources that I'm not sure that currently Israel would focus on doing. What I think, however, is possible and should be pursued would be a joint strategy whereby the US, the state of Lebanon, Israel, and maybe a few other regional players.
UAE, perhaps.
UAE, maybe the Saudis, maybe even the Syrians, join forces and focus on weakening that cancerous cell in Lebanon called Hezbollah, and by weakening it by using military means, Israeli pressure, some Lebanese pressure. They're limited in their ability to do so. But what's up there for the taking is Hezbollah's economic infrastructure. They have a separate system, a separate financial system in Lebanon that is separate of the Lebanese financial system. It supports the constituents of Hezbollah, Shiites in the south and wherever Shiites live. They have a special bank, Qard al-Hassan, and a few other financial institutions. They have gas stations. They have supermarkets.
Why has that not been hit, Jonathan?
Some of it has been hit. I mean, the IDF has been targeting repositories of money and gold in the Dahya. We did that in the early stages of the war when Hassan Nasrallah was still alive. I remember we even published it, kind of like a gold hunt, where the IDF informed people in Dahya where exactly Hezbollah was hiding its gold and money, under which buildings, and wanted to see what would happen and how many popular attempts there would be to actually go there and grab it. But
the Lebanese gold rush.
Yes, the Lebanese gold rush, the El Dorado. But the infrastructure hasn't been, economically hit enough. And there's been physical damage to it, but the infrastructure exists. And I think that is something that Israel, the Lebanese state, and the US should focus on, to weaken Hezbollah's ability to continue to enjoy the support of the population, to weaken their ability to continue to pay salary to their fighters, to weaken their ability to have this separate, insulated network that provides fuel, gas, medical services, schools, and money to a population that, by getting these services, remains loyal to Hezbollah and continues to support them. That needs to be weakened, and it needs to be a patient, long-term approach that applies pressure from all directions with the aim of eventually weakening Hezbollah to such an extent that the Lebanese armed forces, the Lebanese government can go in, do what they need to do, which is to disarm Hezbollah without casualties that are beyond the threshold that they're capable of dealing with, which I don't think is very high. So it'll have to be a very low and manageable number. How can that be achieved? By significantly weakening Hezbollah before. I believe that to be obtainable. I think that's a realistic goal that the state of Israel, the state of Lebanon, with US help, with a few additional partners, can try to achieve. And I think it's something that Israel and Lebanon would benefit greatly from. And I hope we'll see that But the problem is that, terrorist organizations and terror regimes, they have a more long-term perspective. They think long-term, they plan long-term. They're not concerned with, election cycles and popularity and, approval ratings. They think long-term, and what we need our side to do, the good guys, is to think long-term as well and get our priorities straight. If we zoom out for a second and look at Lebanon, Israel, the region, now is a beautiful opportunity to really undo the biggest and most important Iranian proxy ever built. The Iranian regime is at its weakest. Hezbollah is at its weakest. Now is the time. There will probably never be a better opportunity for the Lebanese government to take control of the country. They have a unique set of help, US, Israel, maybe the Emiratis and others that are willing to help. And what they need to do is to seize the moment.
The Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, have been very, very clear that they are going to try, as soon as this ends, to eliminate the threat. Now, I understand from you that it might be very difficult without the U.S. supplying. We're probably never going to have a U.S. president, or it's hard to imagine a U.S. president that's more favorable towards Israel than President Trump. However, he's trying to convince the American people right now that Iran is important. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to convince them that Lebanon is important too. Maybe they can supply Israel. But Israel, you don't think Israel has the ability, if it goes in full force and is willing to pay the price, that we could push Hezbollah to the limit, hit those financial institutions, hit the gas stations, take out whatever revenue they are getting, and to push them strong enough that the Lebanese government would go in?
Yeah, with kinetic means, no. I think Israel can do a lot of damage. I think Israel can strike Hezbollah hard. It can inflict significant structural damage to the Hezbollah's commanders, its structure. We've already killed several thousand. Our brave fighters, IDF, and Israeli Air Force on the ground in close combat, close quarters combat, and in other means, has already been very effective against Hezbollah, which is tremendous. But military achievements, in my mind, only gets you so far. And Hezbollah, as long as it has the support of the Shiite population, as long as it has the structure, the infrastructure that allows it to exist as a state within a state, they'll be able to, they'll tuck down and be more defensive, not so much exposed. They'll wait for pressure to abide or to weaken, and then they can emerge again. And that, is something that we've seen terror organizations do in the past. Terror organizations are very good at shrinking, and then when the situations are better, expanding again, recruiting more people, emerging victorious, and claiming that, this mighty nation state tried to defeat us, but here we are. That's a good calling sign for recruitment, and that needs to be prevented. So in my mind, comprehensive pressure, that is military, economic, political, social, that is the way to go. And I think we'll see combat against Hezbollah for quite a few more months ahead. Maybe not at the level of intensity that we want, but I think we're going to see continued efforts. And with regards to what the world thinks about it, what America thinks about it, I think here Israel will have more freedom of movement, because Lebanon, unlike Iran, doesn't affect global oil prices, or it won't really affect how much Americans pay for gas at the pump. And therefore, I think Israel will have more ability to do so. And also, I think that Europeans, Arabs in the region, a lot of people understand what Hezbollah is and how bad they are for Lebanon and how bad they are for the region. Therefore, there will be willingness, or at least less interference in Israel actually helping getting the job done.
One of the most rapidly changing metrics of the war between us and Lebanon has been drone warfare.
Yeah.
And we've seen it progress through multiple stages. It's like going from the iPhone 1 to the iPhone 10 in a very, very short period of time. And now we're talking about fiber optic drones.
Yeah.
Can you trace for us, Jonathan, the evolution of where we were with drones, why now we're hearing about fiber optic drones being used from both sides, and why these are so dangerous?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been so much going on and so many developments, technological developments, and in the use and the application of civilian and gaming technology in with military in military scenarios. A lot has happened in the war between Ukraine and Russia. Both sides have really used technology and been very creative in applying it for military purposes. I'd say that the Ukrainians have probably done it better, faster, and to greater effect than the Russians have. And I think as a smaller force, they've been able to leverage a lot of influence on the Russians. And of course, whatever happens on one battlefield usually is observed and copied or enhanced on other battlefields. So what we see happening is Israel and Hezbollah using new tools that are available, that are cheap, fast, expendable, and effective on the battlefield uh, as a weapon of, there's a very important psychological aspect to these drones because it really makes a person on the ground, whether he's an IDF soldier or a Hezbollah terrorist, feel threatened or aware that he can be targeted any time that he is outside and exposed to the sky or in a soft vehicle. And that's a difficult mindset to be in. What we're seeing in terms of tech is these drones that use cyber optics as a way of controlling them, which makes them almost impossible to jam, intercept, and interfere with.
Can you explain that? Meaning a normal drone, I've got my little controller,
Yeah,
and my DJI flies up in the air and flies away from me.
yeah.
So
So
that
that's
was
based on
something-
radio.
That's radio.
That's
waves.
radio,
And why is that
radio
no
waves.
longer working?
And radio waves can and are they can be jammed, and as such a drone can be can take control of it relatively easily and crash it into the ground, and then it's no longer a threat.
And even Hezbollah has that technology to jam and to do these things.
To a certain extent, not at all as close to what Israel and other countries have, but yes, they also have that ability. And fiber optics, it's simply a very, very thin. Think of something like a hair, maybe a little bit wider than a hair in terms of diameter, of course, much stronger. That is in a little pod underneath the drone, very lightweight, and is organized in such a way that it just is released from the drone, and it connects between the controller and the drone as it is in the air.
So there's like a spool of thread.
Exactly.
It's almost like a kite. It's
Yeah.
got like a string attached.
A string attached to it,
Uh-huh.
which transfers information extremely fast in a way that you cannot interfere with it externally. It's not radio waves, and in order to affect it, you have to effectively cut it, which is a very difficult thing to do as it is flying. These drones are very nimble, very fast, are able to fly high altitude. I mean, they're not strategic ones, but you can fly them relatively high above ground, and then in extremely narrow areas, very maneuverable and respond very quickly. And with operators that have the skills and the training, you can hit fast-moving targets. Two terrorists sitting on a motorcycle, riding at full throttle and trying to escape. They will be targeted if they're out in the open, and we've seen the IDF successfully do that just a few days ago. And unfortunately, we've seen Hezbollah use similar drones against when Israeli soldiers were trying to evacuate wounded, trying to strike a helicopter. We've seen them attack Merkava tanks, jeeps, and other infrastructure, and also locations where Israeli soldiers are inside houses. All of that is happening. So it's a weapon that is, it's not surprising. We've been covering this for a long time. Anybody who is into military affairs has seen and recognized the growing importance of remotely piloted vehicles, whether it is in the air, at sea, underground. This is really a very strong trend. And what we're seeing now is both sides using them relatively effectively. Israel has been using drones very effectively underground in order to clear Hamas and Hezbollah underground infrastructure, look for booby traps, And, before we send a dog or Israeli soldiers down, we check it thoroughly with drones. We've been able to use it in order to take out terrorists, and there's a lot of footage that's out, and that's always nice to see when the IDF uses new tech and is able to show what it does on the battlefield. And sadly, we've seen Hezbollah also make effective use of those weapons. And I think it's something that we're going to continue to see intensify until one of the sides, my bet would be on Israel, is able to find a technological solution that negates the other side's ability to use that weapon. That's always the cycle. You always have the competition between attacker and defender, between warhead and between the defensive armor.
I want us to now go from the north. Let's take a trip down south and let's go into Gaza. So for a number of months now, Israel's been stopped again at another yellow line in the Gaza Strip. You and I both know Gaza well. You know Lebanon more than almost anyone else I've met. But Israeli troops are at this yellow line in Gaza, and there's a board of peace that was set up by President Trump. I'm not sure who's heading it today. There's been, in terms of the popular head, there's a technical head of the Board of Peace.
Yeah.
But we've been hearing, even in a document that was leaked this morning in Times of Israel, apparently said that the head of the Board of Peace said that if Hamas does not agree to disarm in the very near future, according to this report, he will not be able to tell Israel to continue holding back from carrying out offensives against Hamas.
Yeah.
Can you just paint a picture? Where are we in Gaza today, and how is this likely to unfold if Hamas does not disarm?
So Security Council resolution, I think it was 2803, if I'm not mistaken, which is the official international version of the Trump peace plan, 20 points, but specifically the first point being that the Gaza Strip will be demilitarized and de-radicalized. That's action item number one. Demilitarized being Hamas will be relieved of its weapons. They will lay down their weapons and they will relinquish control over the Gaza Strip. We are still at that point. I'm extremely happy that our hostages are back home. I am forever will be grateful for the personal involvement of the president, his negotiation team, the fact that they were able to pull off this miraculous act of getting all of our hostages home, all of the live ones, all of the murdered ones, and for the first time since 2014, there are no Israelis in the Gaza Strip, and that is a phenomenal achievement that I think forever we as the Jewish people will remember and thank President Trump and his team for. That's a major achievement. But other than that, when we look at reality on the ground, we have the Trump plan, which on paper, totally good, something that I think Israel could live with, would be great for people in Gaza, would be great for the region, it would set them on a different path, a different trajectory of prosperity and good future. But the condition and everything hinges on Hamas being disarmed. And the head of the Board of Peace, Nikolai Mladenov, a very seasoned diplomat and politician. He was here in his previous iteration as the special coordinator of the UN. A rare instance of a UN-appointed official that actually was respected by both sides, by Israel and by Arabs, and was seen as effective. This is a guy who gets it, who understands the dynamics of the region. And I think if he said that, which we haven't heard him say it, but if he actually said that, I think it's, a very clear-eyed assessment. It's obvious that as long as Hamas has weapons, there's no moving forward. There won't be anybody clearing out the rubble. There won't be reconstruction. There won't be alternative housing. Nothing good will happen as long as Hamas continues to oppress what's left of the Gaza Strip and the people who live there. So that's the precondition. Everything hinges on that. And it's good that that's something that's now out in the air, because a lot of people, they thought half a year ago, so when the deal was made, a little bit more than that, oh no, we're great. Now there's going to be peace and, a conflict has been solved. Well, unfortunately, not so fast. And we're still square one. And Hamas has said very clearly, they said that last week officially, we thought about it, they say, I'm paraphrasing, and we're not going to disarm. we're going to stay in control of the Gaza Strip. And where that leaves us, where that leaves people in Gaza is in misery. It leaves the Gaza Strip under Hamas occupation. It leaves the Gaza Strip in horrible humanitarian condition. And anybody who cares about the plight of people there, they should focus their energy on one thing and one thing only: get rid of Hamas. The moment that happens, then there is the possibility of a succession of positive events to happen, for Gaza to be de-radicalized, for a different type of government to be instituted, for reconstruction to be done, for vocational training, for a different education system, for UNRWA to be disbanded from Gaza and chucked out, and then for a different education system to be implemented so that Gazans will focus on future prosperity for themselves and not trying to destroy Israel as a primary vocation in life. Many positive things will happen. None of them will happen if Hamas isn't disarmed, and that is where we stand today. Israeli troops deployed in the Gaza Strip, dismantling layer after layer, tunnel after tunnel that Hamas spent so many years and so much of the foreign aid that was provided to the Gaza Strip in building military infrastructure. That's being dismantled by Israeli troops every day that goes by. But the bottom line is one that is unfortunately pessimistic. If Hamas aren't willing to disarm and nobody forces them to, the Gaza Strip is square one.
Which means that Israel will be forced to do so.
Which makes that extremely likely, yes.
Jonathan, I want to thank you. It is always with you a journey. I feel like we go up in some aerial surveillance vehicle, we fly to Iran, we fly through Hormuz, back into Lebanon, back into Gaza. You have such an incredible grasp of the Middle East. And I just want to say to our viewers, as a representative of the State of Israel, as a spokesperson for the State of Israel, Jonathan, I think your clarity is a gift to the Jewish people. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Doron.
And we're always going to force you to come back to truce as long as we can.
No need to be coerced. I am happy for every opportunity, and I think JNS does a great job at providing information to people who want to understand the complexities, the good, the bad, and the ugly from Israel. Not in, sugarcoating anything that Israel does or the IDF does, but really getting a better understanding at the realities, which a lot of time consumers of mass media in the West are robbed of. If you only listen to mass media, your understanding of the situation on the ground will be flawed, whether it's Iran, Gaza, Lebanon, Judea and Samaria, Israeli politics, it'll be flawed. And what I suggest people do is always have a variety of sources of information, including JNS, including other sources that have a much clearer perspective on what happens on the ground. And I'm always happy to have the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Doron.
Thank you, my friend.